During our romantic trip to Italy, intended to rekindle the love that once defined us, everything seemed to be falling back into place. The sights, the sounds, and the shared experiences brought fleeting glimpses of the joy we used to know. But then, without warning, Jay shattered the illusion. It was our last day, and we were standing on a cliff in Naples, gazing out at the endless blue horizon. The waves below crashed against the rocky shore with a rhythm that felt eternal, indifferent to the storm brewing between us. The air was warm, tinged with salt, and the kind of stillness that usually soothes the soul now felt ominous. Jay turned to me, her face framed by the golden glow of the late afternoon sun, and said words I never expected to hear. "I think I need to stay here a little longer," she began, her voice steady but devoid of the warmth I was used to. "Without you." For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. My mind raced to catch up, replaying her words in search of a meaning that might hurt less. But her expression, calm, resolute, left no room for misinterpretation. "What do you mean?" I managed, my voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. She looked out at the sea, avoiding my gaze. "I need time to think. About us. About everything. I need to figure out who I am, and I can't do that while we're together." Her words were like a sudden chill in the balmy Italian air. The vibrant scenes of Venice, the laughter over truffle pasta in Rome, the quiet moments in gondolas, all of it now felt like a cruel prelude to this moment. Wasn't that the whole point of this trip? I asked, desperation creeping into my tone. To find our way back to each other? To heal? Jay finally turned to face me, her eyes glistening. "I thought so too," she admitted softly. "But being here has made me realize, maybe I need more than just us to feel whole again. I need to be alone for a while." I stared at her, struggling to process the enormity of what she was saying. The love of my life, the woman I thought I was rebuilding a future with, was now telling me she needed space, away from me, from us. The silence between us stretched, broken only by the distant cries of seagulls and the relentless crash of waves below. I felt a mix of emotions, confusion, anger, heartbreak, all tangled together, each one threatening to overwhelm me. And in that moment, I made a decision. If she needed to find herself, I wouldn't stand in her way. But I wouldn't be a part of her journey anymore. "All right," I said, the word heavy with finality. "If that's what you need, I won't stop you. But you're on your own now." Her eyes widened, surprise flickering across her face as my meaning sank in. I wasn't just stepping back emotionally, I was severing the ties completely. I left her there on that cliff, with the Italian sun setting behind her, casting long shadows over what was left of us. As I walked away, the only sound was the crunch of my footsteps on the gravel path and the distant roar of the sea, a fitting soundtrack to the end of a love story that had once seemed unbreakable. Really missed something? Was there something I hadn't considered, something they were seeing that I wasn't? The words from my friends lingered in my mind like a bad taste. They weren't there, they didn't feel what I felt. They hadn't seen the way she told me, with such finality, that she needed to stay in Italy without me. How could they possibly understand the confusion and shock I was experiencing? This wasn't just a disagreement over a trip, it was about something deeper, something fundamental in our relationship. The night stretched on, and my thoughts spiraled as I stared into the darkness. I kept replaying her words over and over, wondering how everything had unraveled so quickly. The person I thought I knew, the person I thought I was rebuilding something with, was now a stranger to me. How had we gotten here? I wanted to believe this was just a temporary bump, a misstep, but deep down, I wasn't sure anymore. And then, the more I thought about it, the more it hit me, was I really supporting her the way she needed? Did I even know what she truly wanted from me? I felt suffocated by the weight of my own uncertainty. Every second of silence between us in Italy, every cold exchange, felt like it was pulling us further apart, like we were no longer speaking the same language. I kept wondering, had I done enough? Had I been the partner she needed, or was I too wrapped up in my own frustration to see her struggle? I had promised myself that I would try to fix things, that this trip would be a turning point for us. But now it felt like I was just grasping at threads that were slipping through my fingers, and I couldn't even tell if she was trying to hold on. The next few days felt like an eternity. Returning from Italy, it wasn't just the absence of the trip that haunted me, it was the absence of everything we had been. The idea that Jay, who had once been so open with me, was now retreating into herself, leaving me in the dark, was gut-wrenching. And yet, no matter how much I searched for answers, no matter how much I tried to make sense of her sudden shift, nothing seemed to add up. When I heard my friends' voices on that video call, their words only deepened the chasm between us. It was like they weren't speaking about the same relationship I had been living. They couldn't understand why I was so hurt, so angry. They didn't see her eyes when she told me she needed time alone. They didn't see the way she looked at me like I was a stranger, someone she couldn't be with anymore. Their comments, their quick judgments, felt like salt in an open wound. "Dude, you left her stranded in Italy," Mark had said, his words sharp, accusatory. It stung, but more than that, it left me feeling utterly alone in the confusion of it all. "I get that you're upset, but cutting her off financially?" Lisa added, her voice filled with disbelief. "That seems a bit extreme." I had tried to explain. I wanted them to understand that this wasn't about money. It wasn't about punishment. It was about respect, boundaries, and a sense of partnership that had been lost somewhere along the way. But as the words left my mouth, I could hear how defensive I sounded. And with every attempt to clarify myself, I felt the distance between us grow even wider. They weren't listening, not really. They weren't seeing the hurt I was trying to hold in. The conversation spiraled, and soon, we were back where we started, in silence, with no resolution. When the call ended, I was left feeling empty. More isolated than ever before. My friends had judged me, and in some ways, they were right, at least, that's how it felt in that moment. The weight of the situation crushed me. Was I wrong? Had I overreacted? Had I failed her, failed myself? Everything felt like it was unraveling. My relationship with Jay. My friendships. My sense of self. I was questioning everything, and all I wanted was clarity. But there was none. Only silence, distance, and the sting of words I wasn't sure I could take back. I stood there, feeling completely cornered, unable to find the words to express the depth of my emotions. I had failed to communicate just how much this situation was affecting me. It was as if every part of me was screaming to be understood, but the more I tried, the more misunderstood I felt. The delicate balance of defending my boundaries and not appearing heartless to those whose opinions mattered most had become a perilous tightrope walk. And as I walked it, each misstep seemed to bring me closer to the edge. A month dragged on since Jay's decision to extend her stay in Italy, and with each passing week, the fabric of our relationship seemed to stretch further and further, threatening to snap. Our exchanges were strained, curt. Days would go by without a word, and when we did speak, it was cold, emotionally distant, like we were strangers again. I had hoped that time apart would bring clarity, that the space would help cool the boiling tension between us. But as her return drew near, a knot of anxiety settled deep within me, tightening with each moment. The anticipation of her coming back had morphed from a hopeful thought into a gut-wrenching weight. And then, it happened. The key turned in the lock, and the familiar sound that used to bring comfort now stirred an overwhelming sense of dread. She stepped inside, and the air shifted instantly, thick with the weight of unspoken things. She looked different, tired, yes, but there was something else. A hardness to her face, an armor she hadn't worn before. The door barely clicked shut behind her before the storm hit. "How could you just cut me off like that?" Her voice cut through the room, sharp and unforgiving. Her bags hit the floor with a thud that seemed to mirror the sudden drop in my chest. I hadn't cut her off, not in the way she was making it sound. I had told her, back in Naples, that if she chose to stay longer, she would have to manage on her own financially. It was her choice, not mine. But somehow, the facts had shifted in her mind. And now, I was being accused of leaving her stranded. "I didn't cut you off," I said, trying to keep the anger from seeping into my voice. I said, if you stayed longer, you'd have to do it on your own. You made that choice, not me. You left me stranded in a foreign country, she yelled, her face flushed with fury. The accusation stung like a slap, sudden and harsh. It felt like everything I'd been holding in, all the confusion and the hurt from the last few weeks, suddenly exploded in that moment. I didn't leave you stranded, Jay. You chose to stay. We had a return ticket already booked, I shot back, my voice rising. It felt like betrayal, the decision she made without even considering how it affected me. Now, she was twisting everything, making it seem like I had abandoned her. The plans I had so carefully laid out, meant to bring us closer, were forgotten, discarded like they didn't matter at all. The argument escalated quickly, spiraling into a mess of accusations and hurt feelings. Jay paced back and forth in the living room, each step echoing her frustration. You could have supported me, she said, throwing her hands up in exasperation. You could have understood that I needed more time. And you could have communicated with me. I countered, frustration leaking into my voice. Communication goes both ways, Jay. But it felt like we were speaking different languages, unable to bridge the gap that had opened between us. What had started as a conversation to air our grievances, to find some understanding, had turned into a battlefield. We were no longer trying to mend what had broken, we were just lobbing words at each other, hurting, defending, but never understanding. The room felt smaller as the fight continued, the walls closing in, suffocating us both. The space between us was filled with unsaid things, with emotions too raw to be expressed. I saw it in her eyes, weariness, like mine, born from too many arguments and too little resolution. And it hurt more because this was Jay, the person I had once been so in sync with. Now, there was nothing but silence and strain. Finally, she grabbed her bag and keys, her movements quick and sharp. I can't do this right now, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I need space, to think, away from here. Without another word, she left, the door slamming shut behind her with a finality that left the apartment empty, as hollow as my chest. The emotional distance that had grown between us was now complete. The days that followed felt like a blur. Jay was gone, and I was left with nothing but confusion and silence. I buried myself in work, avoiding our mutual friends, not ready to face their questions or their pitying stares. It was during one of these late nights, when I was leaving the office later than usual, that I ran into Ben, someone I had always thought of as more of a brother than a friend. Hey, man, Ben greeted me, his expression hesitant, like he was debating whether or not to say something. We sat down for coffee in a quiet cafe that was nearly closing. The soft hum of the remaining patrons provided an illusion of privacy as he finally spoke up. I wasn't going to say anything at first, Ben began slowly, stirring his coffee, but, well, it's probably not my place, but I heard from E. You know, she's close with one of Jay's friends. Ben paused, his gaze intense. Jay, she's been borrowing quite a bit of money from people while she was in Italy. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Borrowed money? That didn't sound like the Jay I knew. Ben continued, his voice lowering as if the weight of what he was saying was too much to bear. Yeah, and there's more. They said she partied a lot while she was there, got pretty wild. And she met someone. I felt the ground shift beneath me as Ben let that statement hang in the air. She's pregnant, he added, his words a cruel final blow that knocked the wind out of me. I could hardly breathe, my mind scrambling to process what he had just said. Pregnant? The words were foreign, surreal. I tried to grasp onto something, anything, but the reality of it all was too much to comprehend. Ben wasn't done. There's talk that she's planning to claim the kid as yours, he said, his voice quiet but deadly serious. To get you to take responsibility for it. The world seemed to blur around me, the cafe, the people, everything except for the cold, hard words Ben had just delivered. I felt paralyzed, unable to respond, the reality of what I was hearing too much to bear. What was happening? How could this be real? Why would she do this? The words echoed in my mind, disbelief mingling with a growing wave of anger. What is happening to me? I finally managed to ask, my voice a mixture of confusion and frustration. Ben, shaking his head, looked at me with sympathy and uncertainty. I don't know, man, he replied, his voice low. Maybe she's desperate. Maybe she's not thinking straight. But I thought you should know, from someone who cares about you. I barely managed a nod, still reeling from the shock of it all. As I left the cafe, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions, betrayal, confusion, and a profound hurt I couldn't even begin to process. The night air, once a comforting presence, now felt colder, pressing in on me with each step. The streets were eerily silent, save for the echo of my solitary footsteps. How had it all come to this? The weight of the situation felt unbearable, the storm building inside me with every thought. What am I going to do? How could I confront Jay about this new reality? The trust we'd built over the years seemed to disintegrate before my eyes, crumbling like sand slipping through my fingers. It left me standing among the wreckage of our shared past, unsure of how to navigate the uncertain, and potentially bitter, future that lay ahead. The days that followed felt like a blur, each one blending into the next in a haze of sleepless nights and distracted days. The seed of doubt Ben had planted had now taken root, growing into an overwhelming tangle of suspicion. Was Jay really planning to betray me so profoundly, or was I just misinterpreting things? I needed answers. I needed them before Jay could make any moves. I started trying to piece things together by casually bringing up Jay to our mutual friends. I watched their reactions closely, hoping for a sign that they knew more than they were letting on. Yet, despite my probing, nothing substantial came out of these conversations. It was as if Ben's words had vanished into thin air, leaving me feeling even more isolated with my swirling worries. Frustration gnawed at me, but I wasn't about to give up. I knew there was one person who would tell me the truth, no matter how painful, Kay, one of Jay's closest friends. She'd always been direct with me, never one to sugarcoat the truth or hide behind polite niceties. If anyone could shed light on the situation, it was her. I reached out to Kay under the pretense of needing advice on how to repair things with Jay. It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. We met at a small cafe, one of those places where the hum of conversation and the scent of brewing coffee create a sense of warmth, making it easier to open up. But as we sat down and exchanged pleasantries, the air between us shifted, the casual tone falling away as I probed deeper. Kay, I've heard some things, and I just want to understand what's going on with Jay, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though my hands trembled ever so slightly. I watched Kay's expression closely, noting the shift from friendly concern to something more guarded. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and she leaned in, her voice cautious yet filled with curiosity. What have you heard? She asked, her tone hinting at something more serious. I took a deep breath, deciding to lay everything bare. There's talk that Jay might be trying to make me responsible for a situation I had no part in creating. That she might be expecting me to take the fall, to take the baby as mine, I said, my voice growing more resolute. Kay's eyes dropped to the table, her hands nervously fidgeting with her coffee cup. After a moment, she looked back at me, her gaze avoiding mine as if the truth she was about to reveal was too heavy to bear. There's something else you should know, she said quietly, her voice steady but tinged with sympathy. After Jay realized she was pregnant, she panicked. She didn't know how to handle it, so she got a paternity test done to be sure. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. My heart raced. A paternity test? Was I the father? The question reverberated in my chest, but Kay's next words struck harder than anything I could have imagined. The results came back, and you're not the father, she said, her voice calm yet laden with sorrow. The Italian guy, he's out of the picture now. My world seemed to tilt. The floor felt unsteady beneath my feet, and for a moment, I wondered if I might actually fall. Not the father? The words were sharp, cutting through the fog of uncertainty. Kay's eyes softened with sympathy as she continued, but there was no mistaking the finality in her tone. She's really scared, Kay said. She doesn't know what to do next. In her panic, I think she thought maybe turning to you would fix everything. Maybe she thought the baby could be yours, and that would make things easier for her. The revelation hung in the air like a dense fog, thick with confusion and betrayal. It wasn't just about Jay and me anymore, it was about the consequences of her choices on an innocent life, an unborn child caught in the crossfire. Kay's expression was torn, her loyalty to Jay struggling against the pull of her conscience. "I'm telling you this because you deserve to know the truth," she added, her voice laced with regret. "It's a mess, I know. But Jay is really struggling with what to do. She's mentioned wanting your help, not just financially, but emotionally, too. Maybe hoping that this situation could bring you back together." Kay's voice faltered, and I could see how difficult it was for her to deliver such a painful truth. "It's not fair to you," she added, her gaze intense. "And I thought you should know before anything goes further." I sat back, trying to process the flood of information that had just been thrust upon me. My mind raced, trying to piece together the motivations behind Jay's actions, the fear and desperation that had driven her to such extremes. The paternity test had shattered any remaining hope that the child could be mine, but it hadn't taken away the weight of the situation. The complexity of it all was overwhelming. It wasn't just about the betrayal between Jay and me, it was about the innocent life now at the center of this storm. I looked at Kay, finally finding my voice after what felt like an eternity. "Thanks, Kay," I said quietly, "for being honest with me. This changes everything. I need time to think about all of this. To figure out what I want to do, how I can handle this without making things worse for anyone involved." Kay nodded, understanding the gravity of the moment. "Of course," she said softly. "Take all the time you need. If you want to talk more, or if you need anything, I'm here." As I left the cafe, the cool air felt sharp against my skin, a reminder that the world had shifted once again. The news had clarified some things, but it had also added more layers of complexity to the situation. What had seemed like a tangled mess of emotions now felt even more intricate, and I knew I had to tread carefully. More than ever, I had to consider the next steps with great care, especially with the unborn child caught in the middle of all this chaos. But what was I supposed to do next? How could I face Jay and confront everything that had unfolded? The uncertainty loomed large, and I wasn't sure where to go from here. A part of me wanted to march straight to her and demand answers, to hear her side of the story, no matter how painful it might be. But another part of me screamed for distance, for time to process, to shield myself from more hurt. What was the right course? Every option that flashed through my mind felt sterile, distant, almost cold, seeking legal advice, preparing for a confrontation, perhaps distancing myself from Jay altogether. None of it felt right, especially when the emotion still raged inside me like a storm I couldn't calm. By the time I arrived at my apartment, the darkness of the evening had settled around me, a perfect reflection of the uncertainty swirling in my chest. It seemed as though even the world outside was mirroring my inner turmoil. The simple act of turning my key in the lock felt foreign, unsettling. Was this still home? Was I even sure of where I belonged anymore? Inside, the apartment was still, too still. The silence seemed to stretch endlessly, amplifying the noise in my head. I sank into the couch, the weight of Kay's final words pressing down on me, reverberating through my thoughts like an echo that wouldn't fade. I had to confront this, face Jay. I needed answers, clarity, something to hold on to before I could even begin to make sense of this shattered reality. 3 days passed, filled with sleepless nights and endless internal battles. By the third day, I couldn't wait any longer. The need for closure was overpowering. I texted Jay, asking if we could meet at the small coffee shop where we used to spend hours on lazy Sunday afternoons, the place that felt like a relic of simpler times, before everything became tangled and uncertain. It was neutral ground, public yet intimate, exactly what we needed for a conversation that could change everything. She was already there when I arrived. Her eyes were red, swollen, she'd been crying. My heart clenched, but I pushed the sympathy down. As I sat opposite her, the air was thick, heavy with things unsaid, unresolved. "I know everything, Jay," I said, my voice trembling, but I kept it steady. "I know about the guy in Italy, the pregnancy, and how you planned to make me believe that I could be the father." Her face crumbled, the shock in her eyes mingled with something else, something I couldn't quite read. I was so confused, she whispered. I thought maybe if you thought the baby was yours, maybe things could go back to the way they were. Her words cut deeper than I expected. The fresh sting of betrayal burned, raw and painful. Jay, we can't go back, I said, fighting the anger and the pity bubbling inside me. Trust doesn't work that way. You've crossed a line I can't overlook. It's too much. We both fell silent. Around us, the soft murmur of the cafe patrons and the clink of coffee cups seemed miles away, as though we were in our own bubble, cut off from the world. Finally, I gathered my thoughts and continued, I've decided. I'll help you clear the debts from the trip. It's the last thing I can do for you, out of whatever's left of my care. Her shoulders shook with sobs, her tears falling freely, and I felt the weight of every shared memory between us. But I had to be firm. After that, we go our separate ways. It's for the best. It was a difficult decision, but the only one I could make. Helping her wasn't about mercy, it was about closing this chapter. About freeing myself from the guilt, the what-ifs, from a relationship that had become unrecognizable. It was time to move forward, no matter how painful it was. As I stood up to leave, the finality of it all settled over me like a heavy blanket. Jay had been a huge part of my life, but now, I knew it was time to close that door. As I stepped outside, the cool air felt like a release. A sorrowful relief. It was done. It was over. And now, I could begin again. Walking away from the coffee shop, I reflected on everything that had led me here. The past few days had been a blur of emotions, but as I moved forward, I couldn't help but feel the warmth of the support I'd received from others. Each comment, each word of encouragement had been a lifeline during this turbulent time. They'd helped me make decisions, provided comfort, and reminded me that even in the darkest of times, I wasn't alone. I wanted to extend my deepest thanks to everyone who took the time to offer their advice and support. Your words meant more to me than I can express. They guided me through the uncertainty and helped me keep my integrity intact. Your encouragement to focus on self-care and seek professional guidance was invaluable. And the reminder to stay true to my values, to be compassionate, even when it hurt, will stay with me. Thank you for being part of my journey. For showing me the strength of this community. It's been a difficult road, but with your support, I found the courage to move forward with renewed hope and purpose.